Good morning. Welcome to the League of Women Voter of Concord-Carlisle's First Friday. Today we have the privilege of hearing from Alan Cathcart, but I'm going to step back and let Robert Hilsinger, who had this very good idea to have Alan Cathcart talk with us about the roads problem. So Robert and Alan and others, Stephen Dookran, who's also joining us, take it away.
Thank you very much for attending today. Just to mention that I think most of us are familiar with Alan. Alan's been here since the mid-90s and was the head of water and sewer until a couple of years ago when he became the head of public works. I think the last couple of years have been interesting, and Alan has survived the tension and the litigation of Nagog Pond, which is not a small issue by any issue. Stephen Dookran has been here a couple of years. Stephen is a professional engineer, registered professional engineer, and has had 23 years of public work experience. I think the last couple of years, it's interesting, has been an observer for the public works. It's interesting the things that come up. And the fact that Stephen came here at the end of the Cambridge Turnpike event was no small challenge. I think the issues of both engineering, budgeting, and an issue which I think most of us don't think about, and that is the ability to communicate with the people who are impacted by that. The people who had to get out of Hawthorne Lane, the people who normally drove down Cambridge Turnpike, Mildred Circle, letting people know ahead of time, even though these are messages we don't want to provide from the town, but we need to share with those residents. So obviously keeping people informed doesn't make the problems go away, but I think is the town's approach to be forthright about what's going on here. So I think those things are certainly important issues. So as I said, I've seen this talk before, both as an observer of the DPW and the evening which Alan and Stephen put this on before. And it seems as though each time that I see it, I learn something new. So at this point, maybe to turn over to Alan and Stephen to proceed from here. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Robert. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you for that introduction, Robert. And just to sort of tee this up in the discussion, we were asked to come and before you to talk about our, sort of the broad category of the roads program, but a little context. Public works is sort of full service where we have a lot of operations. We have water, sewer, highway grounds, park trees, cemetery, and those are the day-to-day operations and services, trash, recycling, that sort of thing. As we speak, we have crews out around town trying to make the public way safe and passable. There's dangerous weather. Just as a word of caution, if you go out this morning, be very, very careful. As predicted, the weather has turned. It went from a fairly mild kind of rainy event to we're now starting to get some sleet and some very slick roads and sidewalks and pathways. So just be mindful of that if you go out this morning. In addition to maintaining, the department is also responsible for sort of planning and capital improvements. And the engineering division, where Steve Dookran is the town engineer, oversees a group of 5 who are involved with looking at improvements and significant maintenance in the right-of-way. And the right-of-way is inclusive of many important assets for the town. As I tell people, they're your assets. We're hired to manage, we're hired to identify and respond to needs. And the response is driven primarily by support, not just an interest, but funding. That support leads to taking a concept or an interest to some plans and development of specifications, design considerations that deal with safety issues, traffic-related issues, environmental protection-related issues. All these things go into developing an actual project. A lot of detail involved, and oftentimes you need expertise, and sometimes we third party or go out for additional support services to get a team of experts in to help us with detailed design. Then you get into the plan of the project, and Robert has mentioned, once we go with we've got a legitimate project, we now need to coordinate and communicate with the community so they're aware of what the schedule will be, what the impact will be, try and accommodate specific needs, and whether it's a neighborhood or in a public area. And then we go for construction. And during construction, there is oversight, management, quality control measures that are taken, because the investments that we make are in the millions of dollars. And so when we do a project, we want to do it right. Recently, we've gotten this relatively new team in Public Works was given the instruction to really try to be transparent with what those needs are, communicate to the community. And I think working with the engineering division, we have the value of some fresh eyes and faces on the community needs. We hear from a lot of different stakeholders and interest groups. Sometimes it's an individual homeowner or resident with a problem in their front yard. Sometimes it's a neighborhood, and sometimes it's the community. And it's we try to be respectful, receptive of all these this information. And part of the challenge we have is trying to manage it and communicate to the community what is being identified and prioritized and funded. So that's a background to what it takes and why engineering division is so important to the town of Concord. And with that said, Robert has seen this presentation. It's been provided in a few different venues, but this is a great group to share. And we're going to go through the presentation pretty quickly so you can get a sense of what the content is, with the understanding that we'll then field questions and go back to various slides as needed for additional explanation. So with that, I'm going to introduce Steve Dookran, and I'm going to try to share the 2022 road program outreach. Can you all see the, I call it a PowerPoint? Yep. Okay.
Yes, it's terrific.
All right. With that said, Steve, you want to sort of walk us through these slides?
Yes. Steve Dookran, town engineer for the past 2+ years. Thanks for having me. We have presented the roads program to various groups in the last several months, and so we didn't rework the presentation. We decided we would just talk about what we presented at an outreach forum we held earlier in January. So my name is there. My project manager, Stefan Cherville, his name is there, but he's not with us today. Next slide. So what we had covered back then, and we probably can go through all or maybe some of it, give a quick overview. The various types of pavement treatments in our roads program. We have put together a slide that shows the various capital plans that would part of which is the paving and roads program. We talk about we coordinate with utilities, and we just mentioned about some logistics when it comes to the actual construction regarding irrigation and so on. And a quick mention about the stormwater management for our MS4 permit. Quick overview here. So we do have 108 miles of public roads. We have 25 miles of public streets, private streets, that is. Our program addresses the public road needs. Private streets are, by the nature of them, they really the concern of the owners. There are some streets that we do some plowing, streets that were private streets that were by town regulation were given to Public Works to take care of just snow removal. So how we address the roads program, we have to do a pavement condition survey. One was done in 2018, and we did it more recently, another one in the summer of 2021. The results of the pavement condition survey is pavement condition index. So they look at all the deterioration levels of the street and put all of those into a program, and you end up with an index that varies between 0 and 100. At the bottom of the scale is 0, meaning the road is gone, failed. 100 is a road that's was just completed recently, and it's in excellent condition. That condition will change over time, over the life of the road. A neighborhood street with not a lot of traffic can give us a good 25 years, going from 0 to a failed condition, if no work is done, if no maintenance, no upkeep is done. On a busier street, an arterial, heavy traffic, you're talking about between 15 years and 20 years of life. And so the average network condition, 108 miles, the average was in 2018, it was 78. And when we did it again 3 years later, it dropped to 67. Certainly that's a bad trend. And there are reasons why that's happening. The rising costs or funding level has dropped over the last few years. And so it's not a surprise that we are on a declining trend. So we have to do something about that. And in the past, traditionally, we would just look at repairing our streets with reconstructing it because it's in a poor condition, or we might do a rehabilitation where you would mill the surface and then put back new pavement. What we haven't done preservation, which is being done by several of our neighboring communities with a fair amount of success. So we are looking at implementing some of those starting this year. We'll start on a limited basis because we haven't done it, and we have to figure out how to manage that as well as to look at how it affects the public, how it affects the neighborhoods, and so on. So this chart tells you if you got to spend money up front when the road is in better condition to preserve it. It shows here a reference of if you spend $1 of preventive maintenance when it's good, you will save between $8 and $10 when it's gone to the deteriorated condition. So as we go further into the presentation, you'll see the different kinds of methods we are using. All right, so for this year, 2022, these are the streets we have chosen to do the full depth reconstruction. That's where those two streets have really dropped to the bottom. This, I think, this amounts to about 3 miles of roads. There are two types of construction for full depth, and you'll see in the next slide what those are. The full depth itself, the traditional full depth is reclamation, where you come in with your machine and you tear up the pavement and you mix it. You grind it up with the gravel below it, and you put that back and compact it, and you pave, 3 or 4 inches, as the case may be, on top of the new base, and that gives you a brand new road, and you'll get, a long life, 15 to 20 on a busy street or 20 plus on a neighborhood street. That's our traditional method. It's very costly, and it impacts a lot to the neighborhood. And so another method that's being used, widely now is what's called cold in place recycling, where the equipment comes in and tears up the pavement, and recycles it through the machinery and put it back on the existing roadbed. And it's a surface that you can drive on right away. And that's the beauty about using this method. You can put that back, roll it, and you'll be able to drive on it. But our plan is to resurface it as well, come back a day later, two later, and put a thinner coat of asphalt. And that will give you a good service life on that road. It's a little bit cheaper than the reclamation. So this is a method we are trying this year as well. All right, and so the mill and overlay I mentioned before, it's what you want to do when your roads are not in the, where it's failed, but this is in approaching a failure condition. So you take a pavement up by milling it off, and you take that away, and that's what we call that wrap. You might have heard the term. It's recycled asphalt or a PS4, but that can be used in other places where you want to make a gravel road, a temporary road. So it's reused in some locations. So you mill off, between 2 to 3 inches, as the case may be, and you come back and you put back new pavement, and that road will, give you another fairly long service life. All right. So these are the streets we have highlighted for this year. I think they total about 2 years of roadways. And the preservation techniques we're going to use are shown on the left for these streets. They amount to about 3 miles of roads. Asphalt rubber, it's relatively new. Some towns like Arlington have been doing this for 6-7 years, and they applied to mainly smaller roads, narrow roads, and what they do, they come in and they lay down the liquid on the surface, and they spread the asphalt coated rubber chips and roll those chips in. And it takes a couple of hours to be able to drive on it. So we're doing that. You're supposed to get 7 to 8 years of life on the asphalt rubber. So you can come back and do it if the road is still in that condition. And by doing this preservation, you give that life and back to a higher pavement condition index. And ideally, you can apply it, a number of times before the road really gets to the point where it needs to be reconstructed. Microsurfacing is the other one when we're trying out some of these streets. That's laying down a layer of an emulsion with some aggregate. It's about 3 inches thick. We're going to put 2 coats, so you'll get it amount to 3/4 of an inch when all is said and done. Again, these are to apply to streets that are still higher up on the PCI, the pavement condition graph, to give some life back to the streets. And in doing a combination of the preservation and the traditional methods, we are able to get more streets done with the same money. So these are what I was describing earlier, the microsurfacing on the left. It's applying that 3/8 of an inch layer, and the asphalt rubber is the one where you use the rubber coated chips. They're pretty long treatment trains, so traffic will have to be maintained properly, because we don't intend to shut the roads down in doing this, unless if it's a road that you can do so and you will impact access to neighborhoods and so on. Okay. All right. So for the roads program, we show you going back to FY21, the bonded money, $1.25 million, current fiscal year, 1.3. We have put in requests for a lot more, 3.5 for FY23 and increasing in ensuing years. That's what it's going to cost us to get our streets back to an acceptable PCI. Currently it's 67. If we keep funding it at the level of 1.25 to 1.3, it's going to go down downward trend, and we'll get to the point where many of our streets will just tear up and be impassable, and it will cost us even more in the long run. So we have done the assessment using our software, and to get our pavement condition up to an acceptable level, 85, mid 80s to say 90, you have to invest at that level to bring our streets back. Even using preservation techniques, again, preservation is going to add some life to the pavement, and you'll have to keep doing that over the years to really get everything, your average back to the higher number. The other source of funding is the Chapter 90. It averages around $700,000. We hope that goes up in the future, but that's what we're planning on going forward. Alan, you want to talk the various capital projects? And
Sure.
funding, yeah.
Just to go back to what Steve was describing, and this is important for the audience to understand, and sort of the vernacular or a vocabulary for public works isn't what people are conventionally used to. Roads program has historically been all encompassing, but if we go back to this slide, we used to bundle a lot of needs into this funding bucket. And the reality is, Steve has helped me sort of identify, and basically the community through a number of different initiatives, whether it's from the environmental front, whether it's from the pedestrian interest, from sidewalks. There's a lot of other needs that are not just road. The road is the pavement. That's what people experience day in, day out. That's what they see. Potholes, cracking, that sort of thing. That's what they observe. But really, within the right of way, there's a lot of other infrastructure and assets that are pretty important. And this is the area that, not just the roads that have been underfunded, but really identifying these other areas of interest and needs. We've gone through to really identify these various, the individual assets. But if we go through this, when we were tasked to find out, to look at the 5-10 year, capital plan for the right of way, we've broken it up into a number of different categories and bins. And so I would kind of zoom in what Steve just described as the pavement, and we're now calling pavement management, with a request for $3.5 million. If you look over 5 years, and this is to give context and understanding of budget, drivers, we're looking at close to 19, almost $20 million of needs to restore the pavement. I'm going to go back up to, again, the vernacular here. When Steve is talking about PCIs, that's an engineering term, pavement condition index. But what we are is, in numbers, it's our roads are in fair condition. And that's a general across the town assessment of the condition of the roads. When we want to get up to good to excellent, you really are talking about a PCI from the 60s, which is the fair, to the 80s or 100, good to excellent. That should be our target. And if we're not investing in the roads and pavement, that's what you're going to experience. It's, we presently, and we're well aware of it, and you're well aware of the road conditions, they're not great. We know that. We're not even interested in great, we're interested in good. And so our job is to figure out what is it going to take us to get the roads to a good condition. So that talks about pavement management. But in addition to that, and a lot of the people who are involved with the league and other committees in town know that there's interest in parking lots. We hear regularly about, what are we doing with the municipal lots? We have, I think it's 18 lots or so in town that we're responsible for. We hear about the culverts and bridges. You're aware that we had a failure of the culvert on Monument Street. It was almost catastrophic. It was an emergency. It cost to do that emergency repair $650,000. Then we have 5 bridges and 50 culverts or something like that, town-wide. The engineering division is in the process of doing an assessment of these culverts and bridges so we can better understand the needs and not have to react, but be proactive with maintaining them or improving them. And you can see there's legitimate costs. I mean, I talked about $650,000 for an emergency repair of one, culvert, and we're identifying a need. And I wouldn't get too. These are all kind of concept level planning, but if you look at this, we're at $3.5 million over 5 years for that infrastructure. Parking lots, we have hundreds of thousands of dollars that we're identifying because we know the cost to restore a parking lot. And just to be very clear, it doesn't mean just paint it black or put lines on it. Sometimes we have to look at the drainage, the structures. If you look recently at some of the work that were proposed over at Stowe Street in Sudbury, that lot, Steve, what is the cost to do simply just kind of a minor improvements for stormwater and the actual lot kind of reconstruction and marking? Is it $100,000 or something just for that scope?
The one that's Sudbury and Stowe is 130,000.
130,000. So that's a relatively modest improvement. But so if we're looking at the 18 lots that we have town-wide and we want to take into account a potential, lighting improvements, maybe electrification, sort of improvements for, vehicles that might park, for handicap accessibility issues, stormwater improvements. Again, if we want to do that, our job is to tell you what it will cost to do that. And we hear regularly from individuals and groups who have these interests, and we just need to be clear, we'll do what the budget allows us to do, and we'll prioritize based on the community needs. But there's another area that we know there's a need, and they've been sort of neglected. And we're starting to identify, how to come around and do the improvements to the level that we hear the community wants. And sometimes, I always talk about the need tos and the nice tos. We certainly have to cover the need tos. The nice tos are sometimes the things that need to be, sacrificed if we don't have the funds. ADA is a need to. Sort of the condition of the pavement is a need to. Stormwater improvements, vegetative enhancements, lighting, those sorts of things become nice tos. But we're identifying at least what it really, what sort of budgets we should consider if we're going to make the improvements that we hear the community wants. Pedestrian and bike improvements are another area outside of the paved way, but it could include sidewalk improvements. It could improve sidewalk extensions. This really isn't an expansion proposal here. This is a maintenance proposal on this table. So when we say, can we expand infrastructure, add to it, we have to appreciate there's going to be a capital cost as well as O&M costs associated with it. But we have a lot of unattended infrastructure that needs management or replacement beyond expansion, but just to restore. Again, all of these assets have a life cycle. A culvert, a bridge might be 30, 50 years. A parking lot might be 15 to 25. The roads, depending on the treatment, anywhere between 5 and 30. Pedestrian and bike improvements are really an interest in enhanced quality of life in Concord, which is good. It's identified in the Envision Concord. It's identified by various stakeholders in the areas and parks in West Concord we hear. But again, to do those things, it's going to require legitimate funding. And so we've identified what we believe are some of those costs. And, you know, just for pedestrian and bike improvements, we're looking at $2.5 million over 5 years. Stormwater, it's a regulated environmental protection need. Concord is, you know, we're fortunate that we have rivers and streams and ponds. You know, it's all part of the aesthetic beauty and natural heritage of the community. But the infrastructure associated with bringing stormwater safely so that we don't have flooding in certain areas, and with the environmental controls and protection, so we're not compromising the natural environment, has real costs associated with that. And these are expanding because of regulations. There is a program called the MS4, which has both the Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of Environmental Protection have new requirements that are imposed on communities that are going to require new ways of designing and improving, you know, that existing infrastructure. We talk about traffic improvements. Anytime there is a need for reevaluating an intersection, it doesn't mean simply it's not pavement. That may be traffic studies. It may need signage. It may be modification of that intersection. It may require, you know, modifying the existing pavement area to clean up something which has been historically identified as unsafe, or if traffic patterns have changed with time, it may need sort of more significant improvements. And then the signals alone, you'll see here, and this has come out in some of our other presentations, we're identifying at least one area where we know there's a significant improvement. And this involves, you know, Steve, can you talk about is this the Baker Ave? I always forget this 450,000 for FY24.
Yeah, the majority of that budget for 24 would be for grading Baker Ave, Baker and Main and Cottage,
Okay.
And some minor improvements over on the Fitchburg and Sudbury intersection.
So which we've heard a lot of concerns and, you know, legitimate interests on what can be done to resolve some of that, you know, traffic safety and congestion issues over there. I'll go up to some of the lower costs. You know, we've divided our through the finance committee. They have a pay-go tier 1 classification. These are generally those investments that are capital, but will require you know, significant, you know, cost, but under $100,000 per. The tier 2 is where we'd go to debt. And we're probably going to hear more about, you know, how this fits into the broader town interests and needs for debt service. But you'll see even up here where we're talking about, you know, striping and signage, you'll note that a lot of the pavement markings need to be refurbished and restored regularly so that they're visible and clean and aesthetically, you know, and functional. And so there's a budget that needs to be accounted for to do that. So in essence, not to overdo this slide, but this packs a lot of information, a lot of meat on the bone of what we believe Public Works, the level of investment should be to provide the community with what it wants and needs on pavement condition, on the stormwater, you know, interests, on the pedestrian bike improvements that may be necessary, on parking lots. It's all here, and we're willing to talk to this. And again, these are planning level estimates that anytime we're going to proceed, it's going to be based on, and historically engineering has been challenged with how much money will we get authorized at town meeting, and then how quickly can we spend it. And some of these initiatives are going to take years of identifying, prioritizing, designing, and construction. And that's been another challenge that we've realized is the annual budget cycle does not lend itself to the most efficient way that we could spend the money because of that cycle. What it takes to actually go through what I just described is what you have to do in order to have a project. And we're also in the process of reevaluating that. Are there other creative ways of doing this? So it's not hand to mouth year to year, because the planning and design for work that's being done this summer, we're wrapping it up as we speak. So we are setting the wheels in motion for work that we are committing to this summer. And that was some of the roads that Steve had identified. We're also in the process of listening to the community and knowing that there's bigger issues and needs, and we need to look at sort of the long game here and figure out, and prioritize where are we going to spend money, and next year and the year after. And it shouldn't be a surprise. These are all assets. They can be evaluated, identified as far as needs, prioritized, funded, and then implemented. And so that's basically, I think, the presentation. We have a few miscellaneous slides here. I think we'll just go to questions, and I will, I don't know if it's helpful to leave this presentation up for the questions. Robert, I don't know how you want to sort of take it from here, but this is the opportunity for people to ask, and we can drill into any of these things we talked about in a little more detail if it's helpful.
I think this is fine. We can go to the questions. I was just going to mention the items that kind of fall out of the sky. You've talked about the culvert on Monument Street. That wasn't an optional thing. 600 and what thousand, 650,000, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other one, there's others, I just mentioned these two, and that was the crosswalk that Stephen got done down at Sudbury Road and Garfield.
Mm-hmm.
That was a request by the neighbors for a crossing there. And I think Stephen went through and made some, best engineering guesses, if that's a fair term to say. But it was a very complicated issue, line of sight issues that I don't really completely understand. But, number one, coming up with a design, finding the money. We are working within a budget, as Alan talked about here. We do have limitations. I think that sometimes it's not always seen this way, but we do have limitations. But Alan and Stephen were able to find the money, which was quite a bit more than they anticipated, and got that done. Those are just two issues. And I'm sure there are other issues that we can look back on, and as well as issues that we don't know about that will surface in months and years to come here. So just a little bit of background or a piece of things that don't, I think, appear to most people that I've seen as an observer of the DPW here. So I guess at this point, any questions that other people have, we'd be glad to try to answer for Stephen and Alan to
We have quite a few questions in the chat box, Robert, if you'd like me to read them.
Please do that.
From Julie, I know what the edges of roads are, or perhaps from Clark. I don't know which. I know that the edges of the roads often deteriorate first and become hazardous for cyclists. Would any of the preservation techniques help with this problem?
I'll try to answer that. If I understand edges as meaning like the shoulder.
I believe that's what it means. We don't have the technical language. Yes, the shoulder.
Yeah. In some streets, shoulders are marked out like Bedford Road. Other streets, you don't have a defined shoulder, but we expect bicycles to be at the edge of the road. The preservation applications will go from edge to edge. So they will improve the edges just like they will improve the center. So yeah, if there are deteriorations, those would be addressed.
Thank you so much. What are the cost drivers in a project? Why do they become so expensive? And can any of those be mitigated?
So every project goes through from planning, design, all the way to construction. And labor costs, if you have a consultant doing the design, we've seen labor costs increase over the years. They don't design any differently. They still use, the same types of software, same kind of engineering applications that they've done in the past. But labor is definitely a cost. We've seen, currently we've seen annual increase in 5 to 6% on labor costs. Construction, fuel. You've seen fuel, vary, but over last year, fuel has gone up quite a bit. And then the cost of pavement, key component in asphalt is liquid asphalt, which is a derivative from petroleum. And that is very costly. That we expect to see a large increase in that cost this year over last year's. And but we have been cautioned about what to expect for bids this year. 7-8% is what they asked us to be prepared for. It could be more. Seeing that everyone has been having difficulty finding staff to man the equipment, to perform labor, what have you. So those have been the typical drivers, and the current trend is everything is inflation is very, very high.
Steve, I'm going to add to that. Again, I've had the benefit of learning. This is all relatively new to me, and Steve's got a lot of experience. And so he doesn't even think about some of the things he tells me. And I go, wow, that's important. I think people need to know this. Our cycle of how we go about things in Concord does not lend itself to being very efficient. When we wait for town meeting to get authorization for funding, a lot of other communities have already sort of put projects out. They're on the street. They've got the contractors go in. They put bids in. It's a competitive industry. And so depending on the size, scale, nature of the project and schedule of when you can go out to bid, these things are all cost drivers. They can be significant. The interest that we have to try and accommodate some of the more local, sort of neighborhood interests of, what kind of curbing is being used? What are we doing on kind of the, screening thing? There's always costs that don't get realized until we actually have the opportunity to get the input. And it's always a challenge for us to kind of explain, we have sort of a, maybe a bronze budget, and we can't provide the gold-plated, sort of work that would be, ideal. We try to strike that balance, but oftentimes those costs, can escalate, and we do have to increase things. We hear about interests of underground utilities, and we hear a lot about Comcast.
Yeah.
If you're going to include underground work, and this to be clear, when I provided you the costs that we see for the right of way, I did not include utility work. So each utility, if water or sewer needs to do work, you're adding millions of dollars to projects. I mean, that's just the nature when you do underground work. Comcast or working with municipal light plant can add costs. You may not see them in that table, but those are part of the project. And then the phasing of allowing the underground work to happen, in the right sequence before we go and do the road work. Sometimes you have to explain that roads that we know need to be done because of pavement challenges are on hold because we're trying to coordinate with utility work, because you don't want to do a road and then come back and compromise that. So those are some cost drivers as well that I think need to be kind of understood.
And as a bit of a follow-up, are there any federal funds coming from the various efforts to support infrastructure building on which the Concord can tap?
Yeah, so we are looking at both the ARPA funds, and those are sort of related to the COVID kind of response. The town has $5.5 million that have been sort of allocated. I regret to say the $5.5 million has got real value, but there's a lot of needs. And if some of the people in the audience have sort of attended recently, there was the select board, had a presentation to identify some of these needs. There's a lot of needs in town. And as far as the roads go and competing needs and interests, it's really not up to Public Works to determine, but we're talking 34 million over 5 years. And the town has been given 5.5 for ARPA. There is the Build Back Better sort of, concept, and that's where the infrastructure, it's a different program. There's going to be real money, we believe. It's still kind of questionable as far as where it's going to go, how it's going to be dispersed. But we're tracking that. And we're certainly going to try and get Concord's, part of what we're doing is identify needs, sets us up for an ask, right? So that's a good thing that we know, and we're sort of capturing what those costs, could be. It remains to be seen how these federal funds flow and where they go. One of the challenges for Concord is there's a lot that deals with equity in this budget, the federal budget, environmental justice, and sort of social justice, equity issues. Concord doesn't register on those criteria, so we're going to have to be creative on how we can sort of get in line. But it doesn't bode well for Concord. We need to know that, and I think I've heard a lot of politicians talking about funding. I haven't seen it yet. And I think we have to be creative with what we're going to do. But realistically, there may be some monies available. We'll certainly be prepared to look at that. I know Concord's is, like many communities, is going to try and facilitate how we can draw funds to this community. But it doesn't exist yet. We just hear about it. But we are preparing.
What Carlin asks, what will be the amount presented at town meeting on May 1st for the FY23 roads program? We appear to be playing catch up.
We have not seen that yet. Our ask for Public Works is we put it in the queue. It then gets vetted through the town manager and finance committee. Our job is to simply explain what we think is necessary. Their job is to find the balance with the other competing needs and interests. I do know when we are looking at $6.5 million of needs for the right of way only.
Okay.
I believe that's the budget the town has to work with at this point for all of its interests. So we're not here to pretend anything, but if we don't put the right numbers out to begin with, then we're doing a disservice to the community. But how and what we get remains to be seen. We haven't seen the
Can I make a comment about a cost picture?
Of course.
I was behind putting that capital plan together, 6.5 per year, 30 something over 5 years. If we don't put it out there, we'll be doing a disservice to the town. As an engineer, my job is always to solve problems. And when I came to town 2 years ago, I saw a lot of problems. I couldn't imagine that we were so far behind. And it's something I wouldn't accept of my own community. And I hate to bring it to stuff. It sounds like we're always trying to sell and get money, and there are a lot of competing interests for the same pot of money. But I tell you, my approach is always, how do we make this work? We cut the fat, we reduce the waste, we increase productivity, increase efficiency. But I think we've done all of those already. And so we got to get real money to fix things, and I don't want to make promises. In the past, I've been in public service for a long time, especially in public works. And if you don't get enough money, what you tend to do is put Band-Aid fixes.
Right.
Right. And it looks good the first year, and then it falls apart, and then you end up with a Monument Street culvert failure. And I don't want to be working like that. I want for the town to get what it deserves, but it does take resources. And,
Thank you.
yes, we're marketing for those resources right now. That's what it takes.
Well, that's a wonderful response. Stefan has a question. Stefan, would you like to ask it? He's unmuting himself.
You may have an issue of muting. I see the
Yeah.
question, Dan. I've actually, now I can follow the chat if that's helpful. So Stefan was asking about, the opportunity to mill and overlay Winthrop Street in, connection with, some construction efforts at Junction Village. Is it complete? Or is that construction vehicles will not destroy it? So the real issue is, Stefan, what you're explaining is, if we're going to spend money, and this is what we're trying to be, how do we do it efficiently so that we're sort of coordinating with other projects? Let me give you an example. We know we're going to, and I'll get back to that, or Steve might speak to the Winthrop Street question, but we're going through with a complete street program. That was a grant where the town got $400,000 to assist and support some funding we identified on Com Ave, Hubbard Street, Sudbury Road. That was part of that crosswalk, funding. But we're looking now, and we've just had a meeting with the West Concord Advisory Committee just the other day to talk about some of the interest around that village center. And we're talking about the complete street grant and the improvements right on Com Ave and some of the sidewalks and crosswalks. It's not, a remarkable upgrade, but the pavement's going to be improved. The sidewalks are going to be more, ADA compliant and improved. Crosswalks are going to be improved. There's a few bump outs. But then the question became on the Dunn Square triangle by Com Ave. And there's some questions that people have raised as far as the safety and some of the brick, sidewalk there and connectivity. So we're looking to figure out how do we, if we have equipment out in that neighborhood, that is the time, even though it's outside of the, scope, limit of work is always very clear in construction.
Yeah.
But if we can expand it and enhance or, sort of maximize the investments into an area, that's what we will do. So we're already looking at that as a, what opportunities for Dunn Square, are there today? I know we're aware of potential development, this 13B development. Well, we would want to partner with, a developer
Right.
whenever possible to maximize improvements. Where can private investment be made to the benefit of that property as well as the community? So those are things that we always think about. I know it's not obvious because not, sort of when we have presentations, we can't talk about all the conversations, but those are opportunities. I don't know, Steve, on the Winthrop Street. Winthrop, I'm trying to remember, is that the private?
No, Winthrop is a public street. We are going to be
Public,
doing the,
okay.
Yeah, it's the one that would connect with Christopher Heights. And,
Oh, yes, right. So.
When and if that gets built.
Yeah, and so there you go. So the question becomes on planning. We know Christopher Heights is, it's always just there, right? Well, a year turns to 5 years before you know it. And then you hold off on a project anticipating, well, you don't want to do something and then have to
If you're going to have
redo it.
exactly.
So
Yeah.
it's a great question, but right now, we have to look at, these are the decisions we have all the time. And what we're hoping for when we get our program in place, when we identify all the priorities, and there are many, and they grow, people can see where we're headed and
Right.
why. We can explain it and understand where we're not headed and why. And that's a very important thing. And I can tell you for the engineering division, there's an unsustainable practice of people requesting work that we have to say no to. It's a bad position to be in. We don't want to say no,
Of
but
course
it's just not there. And the people who ask may not have the opportunity to participate in a lot of the
discussions,
public
right.
forums to understand it. So we're trying to figure out, can we put things on the web where people can come and watch this presentation at their convenience, maybe to understand some of what we're up against. We've had an example recently, Barrett's Mill Road is part of the roads program.
Right.
And we talked about a preservation technique, a low-cost approach to improve the condition of Barrett's Mill. That's not a reclaim, it's a low cost, meaning a kind of because structurally it's in good condition. So we don't have to do a lot. And then a question comes up, can we put a sidewalk in at a certain area or a crosswalk across into an area where there's guardrails and across a main road? And it seems like an obvious, easy ask of, you're going to be there anyway. Can you just add this piece of the puzzle?
Right.
Well, the puzzle, the preservation may be $100,000. I don't know what it is, Steve. You know at this point what the Barrett's Mill preservation is?
$100,000. No, it's I don't know, but I think it's 100,000.
Whatever it's going to be, but I tell you, the sidewalk and crosswalk is probably a $200,000 initiative. So
Wow.
it seems like it's just a simple ask. Well, you're going to be there anyway. Can you put some lines on the street and put a light up or something? Because we'd love the connectivity. And the challenge is it's a big ask. They don't know it. It seems simple, but we're in a position of having to say, well, that isn't part of the project. And if it were part of the project, we may not be doing the preservation. It may not even be prioritized because we'd be spending it over in West Concord, who knows? But that's an example of, just so people in the audience know, we listen to the requests. It goes into the assessment. The Complete Street project that was done I think it was 5 years ago, identified these hot spots of interest, which were based on community input. But what's remarkable is it's very incomplete already. I mean, and Steve and I, who weren't here to develop it, Diane, the crosswalk over on Sudbury Road to connect the parking lot
with Stowe
to
Street.
the library was not part of the Complete Street program, not identified as a need. And we talk about it and says, yeah, this is a legitimate need, but it's not even on a list that's already been sort of vetted. So we're trying to figure out, how do we get these various interests on a list, help the community understand where they can be prioritized. If there's special grants that we could look at based on, maybe it's related to a school area, great. Maybe there's a grant program that would help us fund that initiative. So if it's not on our radar, we'll never get it up for funding. But if it's on our radar and Dunn Square could be complemented with private work, great. That's an opportunity. A crossing over at
Barrett's Mill?
what is it?
We have
Over
several.
the Alcott School. We were talking about some sidewalks.
Haywood Street.
Haywood, Haywood. All right, well, that might be a different program, different opportunity for grant funding. We'll look at, because we're trying to figure out what's the right fit, where's the right, source of funding. Are there any things that might happen over the next 5 years with the Concord Rotary, given this federal infusion of big money? That may be a regional opportunity that Concord should have, prepared. And if there is something that's done with the Rotary, what about the connectivity of people along 2A that, want to get in? So that's how we think, but it's all a matter of getting input, identifying them, getting them on a list, and then vetting them and being efficient with how we tackle them.
Ned Perry asks an important question. I think he says, in an era of rising costs, could you explain from your perspective why the funding level dropped in recent years for DPW? Was it pressures from the town manager, pressures from FinCom, a lack of support at town meeting, or other pressures? And how would you urge citizens to support your endeavors?
All right, one of the more obvious, and again, we're sort of we weren't here to see how that sausage was made. So, it's difficult. I don't have the understanding. Steve doesn't. However, we do know the Cambridge Turnpike was a major project.
Sure was.
And I think that ended up having to be somewhat subsidized with some of the roads program funds. because it was, the cost, it was a multi-year project. So I think there was a lot of focus on funding, and sort of that may have bundled some of those available funds that could have been used elsewhere. I'm not certain, but I think Steve and I have talked about that. The other issue is, I'm not sure historically ADA issues were not something that were required or prioritized. So when you add those to some of the improvements that we make, that may have increased costs. The stormwater component, I know, was never really appreciated, and that's why there are regulations that exist. So we need to look at funding for stormwater that wasn't realized before. But Steve, do you have any sense of other kind of elements? Again, we haven't really done a lot of looking back. We haven't had the time, quite honestly. But Ned, it's a good question. We just know kind of looking forward where we're going.
Yeah, I don't think my guess is a case was made for a comprehensive program to address all infrastructure needs. I think, they were aware that things were deteriorating. There's evidence of that. But in terms of like really putting the plan together and costing it out in the future, I don't think that was done. Maybe I could be proven wrong, but that'd be my guess.
Thank you so much. Carlin has a question that's, again, very good. Will the roads program at $6 million for FY23 be classified as a tier 2 capital expense or a tier 3 capital expense?
I imagine we're going to be looking at what we're identifying as a need and reevaluating how we're going to fund this, because the existing model doesn't seem to fit, right? If the town plan is for X amount on debt and we're asking for more than that, I'm not sure. I would be reluctant to answer the questions on the larger finance for the town. We're not really privy to how this would work at this point. I mean, we're really focused on task at hand was what are the needs. We do not anticipate we're going to get the funding we're asking for. That's, it's not expected, and probably it doesn't work for the town. We know that, but it doesn't work if we don't tell the town what the needs are.
Absolutely. It's a balance always,
Yeah.
a delicate balance.
Right.
And Julie asks, and incidentally, this will be up on the Minuteman Media Network for people to see. And I suspect that Carlin is a wizard at all this. We might be able to make sure that this is also on the website, your website, so people can observe it, because the questions and discourse have been so helpful. Julie is asking, I'm curious about your comment that town meeting approval ends up increasing costs because we are later than others in putting work out to bid. What might we think about to work on that problem? Is this about timing of town meeting or about the length of time the process takes?
I think it's probably looking at a funding that is not limited to an annual schedule.
Oh.
And, if there was a debt authorization for a multi-year program, for instance, that might make sense. Then we could, but again, understand, I'm now out of my lane as far as expertise. But I think, we'd be talking with the interim town manager, Carrie LaFleur, on kind of this, the finance committee, where it's not, it's the circumstances. It's not that town meeting is right, wrong, and different. It's just, it does lend itself to not knowing what your funds are until they're approved. And
right.
As we may say we need X and we get Y, and I think we just need to we can't go out if we have a plan. Oh, thank you. This is a great opportunity. Plans are plans. They're not projects.
Right.
I can't underscore the need for this audience to understand there are many plans out there, and Concord is great with planning. And, the challenge is the implementation is dependent on a number of factors that, the person who thought this was a good idea in the plan doesn't know it was usurped by something else, was a priority for another reason that they don't need to understand or have the understanding. So we have lots of plans out there, and we're trying to match the schedule of implementation accordingly. And I use Envision Concord as an example. it was set to, I think it's kind of a compass.
Yes.
It's all encompassing. It's got everything under the sun, all these great ideas with certain opportunities for connectivity between some of these ideas, which is the remarkable aspect of, let's make sure we're thinking this holistically. But if something's identified as a plan, some people look at it as a commitment. It's not, it's a plan.
Plan. As a friend of mine said the other day, all in response to COVID, if you want to make God laugh, have a plan. Things can be, I see that David Allen has a question.
Good morning. On the subject of, been thinking what phrase might be appropriate here. Target of opportunity undertakings, completely out of any plan, unexpected, and particular. And the case that I'll relate very quickly, the school crosswalk up on Sudbury Road here beside Canantum. And I apologize, I got here after the start if any of this has already been covered. I thought it might be helpful to hear from inside the community how that came to rise up to the surface. And I can't tell you the deep appreciation. I'm in Canantum. Responsible for the listserv, where this is a very hot topic for some time. I can't tell you how appreciative people are that you found the means and you made it happen. The heart of it is that with COVID, the kids needed not to get on the school bus for all the obvious reasons. They certainly weren't vaccinated, needed not to be on that school bus. They needed to walk to school. And their lives were at stake. I mean, just to be blunt about it, there's zero question their lives were at stake. In fact, one little anecdote sort of underlines this most extraordinary way. One of the parents, as it happens, the parent who lives, we are grandparent age, but one of the parents that lives in our household was threatened with being arrested by the police out there because he was acting as a crossing guard. Well, I'm happy to tell you he didn't get arrested. They worked that part of it out. But the parents damn sure were not going to let their kids' lives be at stake, which were very much at stake. And if you have ever paid any attention, you'll know that there is a rise in the road there and you can't see from one side to the other, so you can't see the kids there. Yeah, it's exceedingly dangerous for the kids. As I've already related, there was a strong movement over here. People from all sides of the conversation. This has just got to happen. And at first, it was prioritized and it fell to the bottom of the priority list, and you brought it back up to the top and you made it happen. And I'll just say again, incredibly deep appreciation. And the point in telling this tale is to help bring to the surface how it is this arose unexpectedly and why, from the community's point of view over here, there was just no question about the priority of it.
Thank you, David. Do you have a question?
No, the point was to try to
Pause and appreciation.
to offer a view from inside one of these events and notice the challenge that it presents to the town, to all of us. You don't have a plan for that money, quite understandably, and it's not a small amount of money. It illustrates the challenges that you all undertake and in this case made happen.
Thank you so much. An anecdotal addition to to a major spending project.
Right.
You're getting a large shout out from Ned Berry and others for how effective and important and valuable this whole presentation is. He hopes that the town moderator will allow a similar presentation at town meeting about the enterprise fund request, because the more citizens are broadly aware of all of this, the more I think responsive and appreciative we will be. Those are all the questions that, oh, wait, Carlin asked a question. How's the morale of your staff who work on the roads program? And do you think their efforts on planning and execution are appreciated?
I'm going to answer that because Steve is, too close. It can be challenging. And again, it's the reason it's challenging is because, as David mentioned, people come at it, honestly from their perspective as far as what they see as a need. And the safety is a big issue in many cases and always a preeminent issue for public works. And part of the challenge is it would be nice if we do something simple. Some people think just put some crosswalk lines down, please. That's all we're asking. Well, what Steve realized is, when he looked at the sight lines and the intersection issue and the complexity, you really need to understand what you're doing. And it's sometimes when you try to solve one problem, you create another. And if the town creates a problem, there are liability issues. And so from engineers, who have to look at things in a way of the liability, they can't do everything to have zero risk. And when they're asked to do something that really puts their professional stamp on something, they have to own it. They're responsible if something goes sideways, they're the ones to answer to it. And so I think the challenge with the morale is sometimes people are animated these days. And I think with COVID, I've said this to a lot of staff and people realize, I think in the big picture, we've all lost a lot of control. We feel kind of, we're victim to this overwhelming, almost worldwide challenges and problems. So we start fixating on the things we can, and we look very locally. And, with staff, we're dealing with lots of people who, may be impatient or may just not have the patience to understand. And it's not, we work for you. We don't want to tell the people we work for that we can't do something they would like us to do.
Right.
But we regularly are in that position. And some people receive it better than others. But I think what we're trying to do at this point is we're better served if what we have is good information. We're a part of the discussion. As David mentioned, what did we do? I'd love to take credit for Sudbury Road, because that's, it's great to have those accolades. I can't take credit. Steve can't. It was a group. It was, a community decision to say, we're going to find the money, we're going to do it. And really for us, we just needed the green light, and we needed the ability and schedule to say, it's not going to happen next week. We know the kids need it tomorrow.
Yeah.
But if we're going to do it properly, we got to design it, we got to bid it, and we got to construct it. And that's going to take some time. And we're stuck with we just got to tell you the facts, keep to them, and hopefully the community. And I will say groups like this are what make working in Concord, special, is you care and you are engaged. And there's a lot of other people in Concord who just don't have the time and energy to, sort of follow all these things. But, I think what makes it, important as an employee in Concord is there are people who are plugged in, trying to do the right thing, try to support. And, so I think that's the balancing act. So with Steve, I don't know if you want to offer anything on your staff specifically, but I know they've all been working hard, COVID, no COVID.
Well, I'm smiling, right? So I try to get the rest of them to smile. No, the thing about the engineers is that there's always a commitment to get things done, to solve problems. And regardless of, the volume of work or the difficulty in figuring out how to get it done because you don't have the resources, we are committed to being service oriented. Like Alan saying, we work for you, and we never forget that. We want to please the folks out there and responsibly. And so that's how we take on the job.
I was just going to mention two things. Last month, when Alan and Stephen
Yeah, what we have, it was actually winter maintenance, I think, is the
Yes.
sort of preparing for how we manage a snow event, which is really worthwhile. If you go to the website, you go to Public Works, Highway Grounds, Snow Maintenance, there's probably a 20-minute presentation where you can hear about the planning, the resources, the equipment, the treatment techniques, and what it takes to respond to a storm. And I will tell you, storm response is no small effort. And one of the challenges, again, is we get questions on, what can we do? Can we expand the program? Can we do more on sidewalks? Can we do things on pathways? Well, an example over the last weekend is we had crews in Friday night. It's ironic, and I'm sensitive. We were talking earlier about how dedicated our operations group are. It almost seems like every holiday and weekend, we're having winter events that require a response. And and most of these things are almost invisible to the general public, because when the roads go from a condition of drivable at 11 o'clock at night to slick and dangerous at 2 a.m., there has to be a response. And that's when our crews are out. And there's been a number of events already this year that haven't been obvious to the general public that require mobilization. We have different levels of mobilization depending on the storm. This last blizzard, we had crews in at late Friday night. I think they arrived at 11 p.m. ready for the storm, and they worked through the storm into Sunday, and some stayed on until early Sunday evening. And the following day, we started picking up on sidewalks. You move snow multiple times. We move it with a plow. A private, plow driver will block a sidewalk. Snow's getting pushed around for a couple of days. We have the parking areas. We have the crosswalks. We have the downtown areas. And there was a real concern that Monday night that we weren't out clearing the downtown districts. And that was, a concern from the local business community. And we have made quite an effort to try and improve that program, but we had no resources at that point. The people that were doing this work were just, had been working around the clock. They needed a break. So we did mobilize for Tuesday evening and we got out there, but that's a point in case where Public Works would love to be there, but storm responses are quite a complex thing, and we have to be reasonable. We have to be safe. We can't put our employees at risk. And we try to figure out when can we do things. And if there's an understanding that we're going to get out there, then, I think by Tuesday, or was it Wednesday morning, I think we're pretty proud of how our downtown looked compared to kind of what was out there, in neighboring communities. We did a pretty good job. But yeah, Robert, thanks for a reminder. If you go to the website, we're trying to improve information, what you can see, but that's a good example of at your convenience. You might want to watch that. It might give you a little insight and appreciation for winter maintenance activities that we're in the midst of. So,
Can you send a link to the video winter preparation for people on the call?
can I do that? I think that's the right question. Not will. I'd love to. Let me see. Go ahead, Steve. You say something. I'm going to see if I can find that while I'm. Let's see if I can do this.
Carlin, can you do it?
Well, I found something, but I'm not sure it's the right one. I found the link on MMN for November 10, 2021.
Yes, try that.
Okay, I'll
Yes.
send you, I'll put that link in the chat because
That'd be
that one,
great.
it's a good video. I've seen already.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Okay.
very good, yes.
Excellent.
Thank you, Carlin, for for all of that. It's the witching hour in about 2 minutes. Are there any other questions that people would like addressed?
I'd just like to say that, excuse me, haven't talked yet this morning. I'd like to say, appreciate the 5-year planning efforts, and I think it will be helpful as the town moves to the longer term, forward-looking financial planning, that it will mesh together well, and clearly you already are thinking in that mindset. So I hope that the town can respond to your request for multi-year authority, because if it saves us money, that's what we should be doing.
Thank you. Robert, do you have a
I
final
don't
word?
think it, just I'd like to thank Alan and Stephen for taking the time out today to share their experiences, their thoughts, and certainly their concerns about how things run in DPW. And I think this issue of the roads is critical. I hope more people will have a chance to be informed about this, because I think we all realize this definitely needs to be done. Thanks very much for attending today. We look forward to another First Friday with another event. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for having us. We
Okay.
appreciate the opportunity.
Okay.
And this is your roads, not ours. Remember that.
Thanks very much.